She didn't hear her daughter crying. That was the thought that stopped him cold the moment he stepped into the apartment building hallway. He had heard the baby's sharp, desperate wails all the way from the elevator, echoing off the old plaster walls like alarms someone kept ignoring. But when he turned the corner, expecting to see a frantic mother rushing to soothe her child, he instead found a woman sitting motionless on the floor outside her apartment, her hands pressed against her temples, her eyes wide and unfocused. The baby's cry continued from inside the slightly open door, raw and frantic, but the woman didn't flinch. That was when he understood. She couldn't hear it. She couldn't hear anything. He hesitated only a second before stepping closer, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle her. She finally looked up, and there was panic in her gaze, but not the kind caused by sound. It was the panic of someone drowning quietly, someone waiting for help but unable to call for it. He raised a hand in a gentle greeting, pointing toward the open door, making sure his expression wasn't threatening. She blinked rapidly, understanding enough to pull herself to her feet and step aside, letting him enter. The baby's cry grew louder now, bouncing around the small apartment, piercing his chest with the familiar ache of a helpless child. He followed the sound to a crib pressed against the wall, where a tiny girl lay curled and trembling, her face flushed red from long, exhausting sobs. He reached into the crib, lifting the baby the way instinct had taught him, one hand supporting the fragile head, the other securing her back, moving with slow, steady rhythm. Her cries sputtered, softened, then weakened into small hiccups as he gently swayed. He hummed without thinking, a habit he hadn't used since his own daughter was little. The tune wasn't important, it was the vibration of reassurance, the warmth of steady breathing, the quiet promise that someone was here now. The baby tucked her face into his chest, grabbing the collar of his shirt with a tiny fist. He felt her finally release a long, trembling breath, and some deep part of him, the part that still remembered nights spent pacing his own dim kitchen with a crying infant, stirred with something both painful and comforting. The mother stood silently a few steps behind him, watching. Her hands shook, and she wrung her fingers together nervously, as though unsure whether she had the right to step closer. Her dark hair was messy, her clothes rumpled, and beneath her eyes, there were deep, hollow shadows carved by sleepless nights. When their eyes met, she mouthed something he guessed was, "Thank you," but her voice never reached her own ears. He nodded softly, trying to show her it was all right. He pointed to his ears and lowered his hand slowly, gently asking with gestures whether she couldn't hear the baby. Her eyes glistened, and she nodded, lips trembling, as if ashamed of it. She touched her ear, then her heart, then traced a small circle on her wrist, a sign of time passing. He understood. She had lost her hearing recently. He shifted the baby carefully to one arm and reached for a small notebook lying on the bookshelf. He tore out a page, grabbed a pen, and wrote quickly, "Your daughter is okay. She was crying, but she's calm now." He handed her the note, and she read it with a trembling breath, pressing a hand over her mouth as relief flooded her features. She wrote back shakily, explaining that she had lost her hearing after a car accident 6 months earlier, while she was still pregnant. The doctors said the damage might be permanent. She had been trying to raise the baby alone ever since, terrified every moment that she wouldn't hear her child when she needed her most. She wrote that she hadn't slept in nearly 3 days, too afraid she'd miss something. She wrote that she felt like a failure, like she didn't deserve to be a mother because she couldn't do the one thing babies needed, respond to their cries. He read her words carefully, feeling them like weight settling into his chest. He thought of the years he spent raising his daughter alone after his wife had walked out. He remembered nights he'd stood over the crib, convinced he wasn't good enough, moments when he questioned every decision he made. Being a parent didn't come with instructions, and even hearing parents sometimes froze, overwhelmed. What mattered wasn't perfection, it was trying. It was showing up even when exhausted. He wrote back, "You're not failing. You're overwhelmed. Anyone would be." Let me show you a few things that helped me when I was raising my daughter." She nodded eagerly, though tears clung to her lashes. He shifted the baby slightly, letting the sleeping child rest comfortably. He motioned her closer and demonstrated small signs babies make before they cry, the way they twist their bodies when they're uncomfortable, how their breaths become slightly uneven before frustration builds, how they rub their eyes when tired. He showed her how to look for changes in color, in their little fists, in their kicking legs. He guided her hand toward the baby's back, letting her feel the rhythmic rise and fall of breathing, teaching her how to detect tension before it became panic. It wasn't about sound, it was about connection, awareness, learning new cues. She absorbed everything, nodding earnestly, hope slowly filling the spaces where fear had lived. They sat on the couch together, the baby resting between them now, finally peaceful. She wrote another message, telling him how isolated she felt. Her family lived far away, and after losing her hearing, friends drifted off, unsure how to communicate with her. She wrote that she hadn't spoken to another adult in weeks, except for brief grocery store exchanges. She felt invisible. He understood invisibility well. Loneliness had been his companion for years. He wrote gently, "You're not alone anymore. You're doing your best, and it's enough. I'm right next door if you ever need anything. Just knock or text. I can help until you get your strength back." Her tears fell silently, but she wasn't crying from fear anymore. She touched his arm in gratitude, her expression softening. She wrote that she didn't want to burden anyone. He shook his head firmly and scribbled, "Asking for help is not a burden. It's brave, and your daughter deserves a mother who isn't terrified every moment. Let me show you small ways to make things easier." He went around the apartment and pointed out simple solutions, placing the baby's crib closer to her bed so she could feel movement when the child stirred, setting up a vibrating baby monitor that alerted through motion instead of sound, arranging the apartment so essentials were within reach. She watched every movement, committing it all to memory. He even pointed to a small whiteboard on her wall, suggesting she use it as a daily reminder system, feeding times, nap cues, diaper checks, anything that would make motherhood feel less like guesswork and more like manageable moments. Before he left, he placed the now sleeping baby back in her arms. She held the little girl gently, almost reverently, as if rediscovering her own strength through the steady weight of her child. She traced the baby's cheek with a careful fingertip, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in what seemed like ages. She looked up at him with eyes filled with gratitude deeper than any words could express. She didn't need sound to communicate that. The warmth in her eyes said everything. He stepped toward the door, but paused and wrote one final message, "You're doing better than you think. I'll check in tomorrow, just to make sure you're okay." She nodded, pressing the note to her chest. As he walked out, the silence of her apartment felt different, not empty, not frightening. It felt calmer, steadier, filled with new hope. He didn't stay because he saw weakness. He stayed because even the strongest parents sometimes need someone to steady the moment. And she had finally realized she wasn't failing. She had simply been doing it alone for too long. He didn't expect her to knock on his door the next morning. In fact, he had planned to give her time, space, and whatever quiet she needed to recover from the exhaustion he'd seen written across her face. But when he opened the door and found her standing there with her daughter bundled tightly against her chest, he immediately saw the mixture of apology and panic in her eyes. She held her phone in one hand, typing quickly before turning the screen toward him. "She won't stop crying. I can't tell if something is wrong. I'm sorry to bother you." He shook his head before she could even lower the phone, motioning her inside with a warm, reassuring gesture. Nothing about this was a bother. He knew that kind of fear, the kind that came with uncertainty, the kind that gnawed at you until panic replaced reason. She stepped in hesitantly, clutching the baby as though she were afraid she might break if she loosened her grip even slightly. He guided her to the couch, motioning for her to sit while he knelt beside her, holding out his hands. She understood, placing the crying child gently into his arms once more. The baby's wails cut sharply through the air, but he felt the familiar steadiness settle in his chest. Being needed was something he never pushed away. It reminded him of the years he had been both father and mother to his own daughter, the years when he learned to trust his instincts when everything else felt uncertain. He checked the baby carefully, his movements slow and deliberate. When he lifted her tiny legs slightly, she cried harder and curled her body. Gas. It was an easy enough problem, but for a new mother who couldn't hear the cry, or its pitch, rhythm, or urgency, it was almost impossible to interpret. He gently rubbed the baby's back, shifting her into an upright position and patting lightly until a soft burp escaped. Just like that, the screaming eased, fading into frustrated whimpers and then into nothing but tiny breaths. He handed the now calm child back to her mother, and she exhaled in visible relief. She typed again, "I don't know how to thank you. I feel like I'm failing her all over again." He shook his head sharply and took her phone gently, typing carefully, "You're learning. That isn't failure. Every parent learns through mistakes and moments like this. You're doing your best. That's what matters." She read his words slowly, her eyes lingering on him as though absorbing a truth she hadn't dared to believe. Then she typed again, her hands trembling slightly. "Can you teach me more? The things I can't hear, can you show me how to understand them? The way you seem to." He paused, then nodded. Of course he could, and he wanted to, not out of obligation, but because he saw how hard she was trying. He motioned toward the kitchen, inviting her to sit at the table while he prepared tea. She settled carefully, watching every movement as though trying to read a language spoken entirely through hands and motions. When he set the warm cup in front of her, she typed again, "How did you do it? How did you raise your daughter alone?" He took out a pen and paper. It was easier to explain with written words, easier to express things that typing felt too formal for. He wrote about the early days, when his daughter was just a baby and he felt like every decision might break her. He wrote about nights when she had cried endlessly and he had walked the apartment floors until sunrise, convinced he wasn't good enough. He wrote about the moment he realized that parenthood was less about perfection and more about presence. Children needed you to try, to show up, to breathe through the fear, even when your own insecurities screamed otherwise. She read every word intently, her eyes softening. When she finished, her fingers hovered over her phone screen for a long moment before she typed, "I wish I had someone like you from the beginning. I've been so scared, so overwhelmed. Sometimes I feel like the silence around me is swallowing me whole." He gently touched her forearm, a grounding gesture. She looked up, surprised but not frightened. He typed, "Silence can feel like a prison at first, but you're not trapped in it. You just need new tools. And you don't have to learn everything alone." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as she wiped tears from her cheeks. He could tell she wasn't used to being understood. That loneliness had been her only companion for far too long. After tea, he spent the rest of the morning teaching her things he'd picked up over the years, how to soothe a baby using touch and movement rather than sound, how to read a child's breathing patterns, how to recognize the difference between hunger fussing and tired fussing. He showed her how to use the apartment to her advantage, placing soft blankets and warm pillows to create comfortable spaces for the baby, adjusting lighting, arranging feeding supplies so she didn't have to search for them in moments of panic. She watched him with a quiet intensity, absorbing everything as if each detail carried the weight of survival. The baby remained peaceful, cradled against her chest, occasionally stretching tiny arms or turning her cheek into her mother's heartbeat. When lunchtime came, the apartment felt lighter somehow. The tension that had clung to her like a shadow since the night before began to dissolve. She leaned back on the couch, exhaustion still visible but no longer overwhelming. She typed something longer than before, and when she handed him the phone, he read it slowly. "I need to tell you something. The accident that took my hearing also took my husband. We were driving home from a doctor's appointment. He didn't see the truck. I've been alone since the day I buried him. I thought I could do it. But the silence, the responsibility, the grief, it all became so much. Sometimes I think I'm breaking. He set the phone down gently, letting the weight of her words settle before responding. He chose each word with care. You're not breaking. You're grieving. And grieving takes strength, more than anyone admits. But you're still here, still caring for your daughter, still trying every single day. That isn't breaking. That's surviving. She covered her mouth with one hand, shoulders trembling. Her tears fell silently. Everything about her world was silent now, but her pain was loud enough to feel. He moved closer, not touching her at first, waiting until she leaned slightly toward him, seeking comfort. Only then did he place a supportive hand on her shoulder. For the first time, she didn't pull away. They stayed like that for several moments, the baby shifting softly between them. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply human. Two people who understood loss sitting close enough that the ache felt shared instead of solitary. When she finally breathed deeply again, he typed, "Let me help. Not because you're incapable, but because no one should have to do this alone." She nodded, wiping her cheeks, her grip tightening slightly around her daughter. Then she typed, "Will you come again tomorrow? Maybe help me learn more. I don't want to be afraid anymore." He smiled gently and wrote, "I'll come as often as you need." She exhaled shakily, as though relief had finally been allowed space to exist. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. He showed her how to prepare formula safely, how to test food temperature without hearing boiling water, how to create a soft bedtime routine using touch and warmth. She practiced each step, her movements growing more confident with every attempt. By the time he walked her back to her apartment, the sun was beginning to set, casting warm gold across the hallway. She turned to him, the baby asleep in her arms, and typed one last message. "Today was the first day I felt like I might actually be able to do this. Thank you." He nodded, touching his chest with one hand, his way of saying you're welcome, even if she couldn't hear the words. She smiled faintly, closing her door with a gentleness that said she no longer felt entirely alone. As he walked back to his own apartment, he felt something stirring in himself too. He had helped her because she needed it, but somewhere in the calm of her silent world, he had found a strange, unexpected piece of his own. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't walking through life alone either.